Welcome, Michael Gervais.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to see you again.
Thank you, thank you.
This came out of a conversation you and I had in your office in Hermosa Beach. And the work that you're doing with personal mastery and high performance, particularly with athletes, I think is perfectly placed to end this conversation.
Great.
We've been talking from General Walt Pyatt about how the Army uses athletes as their model for high performance, and you have been doing the leading work in that field for some time. And I just want to frame it in a way that might give us a map for our little chat. We've talked a lot up to this point, on one hand about all the cliches about how mindfulness is about being in the zone and being in sync and being in flow, which are really inspiring, but it's like sugar. Gives you a big high, and then you crash after that. On the other hand, a lot of times it's presented as a curative. It's fixing something that's broken.
Yeah.
And
we don't talk about either of those approaches.
Right, exactly my
Yeah.
point. You're in the middle of that. You are one of the leading people presenting mindfulness beyond mindfulness, where it's not the word at all, but it's about the benefits that can come by adding that as one part of a bigger mix. And you're doing that with a population that wouldn't otherwise be interested in this topic.
Yeah.
So we'd like to hear, I think, about 3 ways this can affect this particular group. To first talk about what you do and what you mean by personal mastery.
Okay.
Secondly, we got to touch on how that has been integrated into the culture of the Seattle Seahawks and led to high performance in a very, very challenging industry with a very challenging set of players. And finally, your recent work, taking what you've learned with the Seahawks and rolling it out into the corporate community, which I think is going to be particularly interesting, because personal mastery, when you see somebody like Aaron Gordon, who just won, was second in the NBA dunk contest, has been doing mindfulness for quite a long time, and you say, well, I could be personal mastery like that. Well, it's not necessarily believable. So please tell us, when you say personal mastery, what's up?
Okay, so this idea of mastery has been something that has been captivating, and to me at least. And what are the mechanics and what are the processes that go in place for people to pursue mastery? And there's really 2 components to it. Mastery of self and mastery of craft is the way that we take a look at it. And hopefully they end up bleeding together. And craft, if you will, whatever it is that you do well, or that you're interested in learning how to do well, is what I mean, or what we mean by mastery of craft. Whether that be an entrepreneur, whether that be a loving person in a relationship, or the guitar, or football, or whatever it might be. Mastery of craft is really the pursuit to understand mastery of self. And so the craft becomes really interesting as a lens and a laboratory to understand how a human works in the field of progression. So progression is much more interesting to us than, which is like growth and getting after it and living on the razor's edge or approaching interest in the razor's edge. That's a much more interesting concept to us than outcome. So outcome is the idea that you do said practices and then you get said result. And what we found is that there's this invisible handshake that we all experience wherever we are in a relationship or in business, is that we'll stay together as long as you perform the way that I hope that you'll perform. And that invisible handshake is really real in high stress and high stakes environments. And in some of the environments, if they don't perform well, they're asked to leave. In some environments, the consequences are so severe and so swift that they are mangled and or dead at the end of it. So this invisible handshake that we're all operating under is really important. And this invisible handshake, again, is that as long as you perform a certain way, then we'll be able to continue to do it. That's a problem. That invisible handshake, that relationship that we're covertly operating with and under, is a problem for the pursuit of mastery. Because what ends up happening is it gets in the way of internal freedom. It gets in the way of the pursuit of progression, as opposed to what is happening for many of our young performers, and likely many people in this room, is the need for outcome. And so I say all that with this thought in the back of my mind, is that we live in a world that, I live in a world that requires outcome to take place. And if we don't get the outcome, it's severe and it's swift. And let's just use professional sports, for example. If there's not enough outcome sufficient to the people that pay the bills, sufficient to the people that are, asking and hiring us to do the work, they fly back on a jet, and we're given bus tickets. So there's to be able to do the things that we love to do, we have to get outcome. Now, what ends up taking place is, this will not be unfamiliar to this room, is that if we don't get the outcome that we want, if we focus on the outcome, which is something that's not in our control, then we end up feeling out of control. And then, so the unwind, so this is just shaping the context a little bit. Mastery of craft, mastery of self. If we invest in mastery of craft, the conversation that most people are paying attention to is what world leaders look like and perform like. And I want to be like that too. If you enter into that world, it's about outcome. And these are all hidden traps. And those outcomes become, the tapestry of those is this invisible handshake. So who do you trust? And so what we end up starting with is, how can you trust yourself? Who are you? What do you have your sights set on? Is it outcome-based, or is it something internally that's driving you about progression? And then that becomes the first pivot for people that we've learned from them, right? So this isn't us making things up. Anything that I'll say today is passing two filters. One is the filter of science, and the second is it's been hardened in the field with people that have to and are required to have outcome. So nothing that I'll talk about today with you will be fluffy stuff that hasn't passed the rigors of hostile and rugged environments with alpha competitors. So it can't be soft.
So already you're talking about a world that these folks will understand: outcomes, performance measured, quick action if that's not.
That's right, yeah.
So you also touched on something that may make a connection to the mindfulness that's been talked about here when you talked about razor's edge.
Yeah.
Is that connected to what we talk about in terms of presence or being present? Is that at all connected, or can you?
Yeah, they are. Certainly, it's connected. So the razor's edge, just as a concept to think about, is that place where our ancient mechanisms for survival kick on, and they kick on to fight, flight, freeze, or submission. And we don't talk about the second two very enough. But we're familiar with fight and flight, and we're familiar with this freeze mechanism where we just can't think clearly. And submission is this idea that, and let's use corporate America for a minute, is that you talk a big game in the hallway with your peers, and then you have the chance to share that frustration or concern with somebody that's higher up the food chain, and then all of a sudden you can't get the words out. And quickly you say to that person, oh, you're right. That's right. It's like a submissive process. And all of that is a response to the razor's edge, or a fear of the razor's edge. So what is the razor's edge? It's that place in which great intensity lives. And it doesn't mean that it is inherently aggressive. It can be love, it can be joy, it can be peace. All of that has a razor's edge component to it. And I don't know if you felt this way, but if you feel great love and peace, there is this other process that it comes with it, like, whoa. Don't go so far with that. You might lose yourself. And so even though it sounds counterintuitive that we would do that to such a beautiful experience, there's a constriction that takes place. And that constriction is really the essence of the razor's edge. The easier part of this conversation on the razor's edge is that what ends up taking place for most people on the razor's edge is they constrict and they can't access their craft. And so you put in blood, sweat, and tears, as we talk about in sport and or entrepreneurship or business, blood, sweat, and tears to be able to have refinement of craft. And then as soon as you get onto the razor's edge to demonstrate or provide an experience of that skill acumen, that there's a constriction that takes place. And that too is the razor's edge. So it's a fear-based process, right? And the problem with the razor's edge is that most people are so unfamiliar with it because we work relentlessly so to avoid it, that we can never really find out who we are. And so that appreciation for the razor's edge is much more than an intellectual exercise.
Can you give us...
for example,
yeah. Great.
How many people here want to have a life where at the end you slide into home base, you're a bit tethered, you're a bit beat up, you've found peace, you've gone for it, you've enjoyed the design of your life, and yeah, you slide into home base like, okay, I really went for it. How many people would like that type of life? Now, if you didn't raise your hand, that's weird. It is, right? Because we're painting this image like of a rich life according to you that has peace in it and straining and striving, all of it mixed in. And so that's the intellectual exercise. Yes, I want to do that. And then to be able to do that, we need to take risk. And so it's the risk-taking process that is a skill. And I've been fortunate enough to learn from people who have broken all the rules that I learned about mastering risk. And so there's good science around risk-taking.
It's connected to failure, though.
Yeah, so so when you take risk, it means that you're going to get bruised from time to time. And it's not always going to be pretty. So the first pivot is really paying attention to what are you really about. Are you really about progression, or are you about playing it safe and looking good? And that's a really tough challenge for people to move from an intellectual concept down into their soul, where they're living from it. So living from something and visiting are two different experiences. And when people live from something, and I'm talking about like a philosophy, when they live from it, it's undeniable. It really is undeniable. And I think we're attracted to people like that because of that consistency and the consistency of being authentic and pure and true, whether that is people that you don't agree with their positions or people that you do. And so that's where we spend a lot of time, is understanding and unpacking the process of mastery, which involves risk-taking and maybe mastering the risk process.
So let's now move into what you get most of the headlines for.
Yeah.
The work with the Seattle Seahawks. Some risks taken that worked out really well, and some risks.
I know where this is going. Yeah.
Not necessarily.
How many people enjoy football in this room? Oh, wow. Yeah, there you go. Okay. And then so you're going to talk about a play.
No,
that
I
didn't work
wasn't.
out.
I wasn't. I just wanted to let that into the room. What I was going to talk about was the other day, Tim Ryan talked about how important it was to put a system around ordinary people to allow them to do extraordinary things. Cool. And when you first described to us, Barry and I, when we talked to you about the system that you've used to bring personal mastery to bear on the Seattle Seahawks, was that it wasn't about an external system, but it was about learning the details of every one of those performers or players about what would release their energy, their heart, to make them the absolute best. And you built the system to support that. And I'd like you to say a little bit about how does that happen?
Well, so we're talking about like maybe two things, which is like creating a culture that supports risk-taking, a culture that supports the process of progression, a culture so if you have those two things right, that supports great outcomes, sustainable outcomes. And so it's not like winning once is interesting to anybody. Winning multiple times demonstrates mastery of a process. And so winning once, you can do that with great talent. And you can also lose a lot with great talent. So we're interested in like the sustainable process of high performance. And it begins with being able to lock arms with people that you're in the process with to go do something difficult and challenging. So if you're going to lock arms, we've got to know each other. And if we're going to know each other, we've got to invest in understanding each other. So the first part, we start in a relationship-based organization. So we see, let me pause. All of this begins and ends with Coach Carroll. So Coach Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks, the culture begins and ends with him. And the rest of the environment has this ability to say, I don't know what it is about being here, but I feel like I can be me. Now, what a radical thought that is. I don't know what it is, but I can just be me. Okay, so how? So the methodology underneath of this very beginnings is invest in the relationship. How do you do that? You first have to know who you are. Then you can begin to be curious about who the next person next to you is, or who the other person next to you is. And so it begins with knowing your personal philosophy and getting it down into 25 words or less and being really clear about who you are and what you stand for. Without that, I think we're doing a disservice to the people that we want to do challenging things with, whether that be a relationship, a loving relationship, or whether that be a relationship that is working in hostile and rugged environments. So that's where it begins.
Yeah.
Knowing who a person is, know who you are, begin to know who somebody else is, so that you can lock arms and go do challenging things. Because we can't do stuff like that is really extraordinary in a sustainable way without having other people connected to us and without us being connected to them. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, but that's the beginning.
Yeah, that's the starting point. But tell us a little bit about how you can individualize that process with 40 different players. Most of the time, whether it's a corporate setting or a famous coach, they have a system. And they're imposing that system on a group of players. And that's like a command control function that we saw on some of the earlier slides. But what's remarkable about the system that you and Coach Carroll are putting in place, and by the way, some of this knowledge comes from a recent podcast interview that Michael did with Coach Carroll on his Personal Mastery podcast series, which if you haven't heard, please go to it. It's a very enlightening series of interviews on this subject.
We're having so much fun with this idea of exploring mastery.
Yeah.
You know, finding mastery.
You're not putting a set system in place. You are supporting personal mastery of 40 different people in a fairly highly scrutinized business of NFL
coaches.
football.
Yeah, in the NFL, I want to say this before we go into the NFL, is that what I'm most interested in are the threads that cross multiple disciplines. And so it's not just long and deep in football. It's, you know, what is the process that works in Olympic settings and military settings, environments, environmental conditions that also support entrepreneurship and business. And so we have our minds and we string our minds through wherever we are. So how do we train our minds? And what we've come to understand is that this, what did you call it, commands?
Command and control.
Command control?
Yeah.
Sounds very rigid.
Yeah.
And I think that the way that we think about this is it first begins with knowing who you are so that you can lock arms with other people. So it starts with Coach Carroll knowing who he is, being really clear about that, then asking his 22 direct reports, who are you today? Who are you becoming? So it's those two questions. Who are you and who are you becoming? And he sits down for 10, 15 minutes and goes through that at the beginning of every year, even though he's been coaching with some of them for 20 years. So what is your philosophy? You know, has it changed since the last 18 years that I've known you? And it does upgrade, it does change. So starting there, and then, so then the coaches, the direct reports, which are the coaches, and the head coach connect. And then the coaches roll that out into the meeting rooms with the players. And so that's kind of like a systemic rollout of the value of having a philosophy and as a beginnings of developing a relationship where we can go lock arms and do the challenging things that we've said we want to do together. Because we all get tested. Every day is a test. You know, the Super Bowl is not the test. It's what happens today.
One of the great things in that process that you talked to Coach Carroll about was that it wasn't about the outcomes, that he doesn't focus actually on winning. And furthermore, that he talked very specifically about not thinking about the past, not thinking about how this play is going to turn out, this moment is going to turn out, but actually being so inhabited in the present moment.
That's right.
Almost with this incredible fevered passion. And tell us how that kind of works into the system, because that's sort of like what we would talk about if we were talking about mindfulness. He doesn't use that word in the system, but...
Yeah. Okay, so where does excellence take place? In the present moment. And so if we're interested in excellence, then we need to pay attention to increasing the frequency of the present moment, our ability to be on time. And being on time is not easy to do, especially in environments that are pulling us and providing evidence that we're not doing it right. You turn the ball over, you do something, there's some sort of evidence that you didn't do it right. You know, you didn't meet the opportunity, the demands of the opportunity. So excellence happens in the present moment. We need to increase our frequency of being on time in the present moment. How do we do that? We have to train our minds. And so if you're thinking about, it's trite, but if you're thinking about the last play or the next play, like you're not on time now. And so there is a value of that that runs throughout the organization. Coach Carroll does talk about being mindful a lot. But he doesn't say, okay, everybody, let's sit on pillows and let's go through a training process. That's not how it's available to the organization. His emphasis on training the mind is so rich that what ends up taking place is people say, well, how can I do that? It's just part of it. It's an assumption that he's making as opposed to him teaching the importance of it. He makes the assumption that we're going to train our minds here. And you need to train your mind if you want to do the things that you've set out to do. And so it's available for them if they choose. It's not mandatory, but it's almost as if he's washing their brain, not brainwashing, but washing their brains of worrying about making mistakes. And so that creates this freedom to be more present, right? So if mistakes are something that happen that are going to pull you into the past or pull you into the future, the worry of the mistakes, failure is not a problem, right? It's the fear of failure that's the problem. So he washes that thought clear by being consistent about the value of progression, not the value of being perfect. And when you get that consistency right across an organization, people can't help to settle in. And so what have we done so far? We've talked about two things. Who are you? We want to celebrate who you are. So who are you? And then we can celebrate. We don't use the word let. We use the word celebrate who you are. And so the media got this wrong 2 or 3 years ago, is that there was this buzz in media saying, Seattle Seahawks are doing something amazing. They let their players be themselves. Geez, that is backwards, isn't it? That is really backwards. And if you listen closely to language in media, you'll hear that. You'll hear that from other organizations as well. It's an understanding to celebrate is where it begins. And that's the first part. And the second part is creating an environment that values progression. And this sounds simple. It's just a relentlessness to say the same thing in different ways every day. And then how do we back it up? We back it up with a methodology of culture building and mindset training that is available every day.
So in a minute, we'll make the switch to see how you're taking that whole process and translating it into a corporate setting. But something else you and Coach Carroll talked about in that whole present moment and really celebrating people, which creates a tremendous sense of loyalty and connection, is something about finding the space between spaces.
Yeah, the space between.
The space between. And can you talk a little bit, because slowing it down in terms of high performance, breaking it down in terms of working in a lot of stress, that's familiar to us, but this goes a step further, it seems to me.
I don't know if it does. I mean, I think that people that are practicing being present, practicing mindfulness or meditation would appreciate that phrase, the space between thoughts. That's where, shit, I don't even know how to say it. I mean, that's just where it happens, right? It's the thoughts are important, and the stringing of those two thoughts are important, but it's that space between that allows great insight. And mastery of craft, go back to mastery of craft and mastery of self. Mastery of craft, one of the evidence or hallmarks of people that have mastered craft is that they're not working in the same frames that novices are. So novices are working at frame 1, trying to get to frame 2, to get to frame 3. And masters of craft have broken that down in ways that they understand frame 1 and frame 2, like elbow in and shoot the ball and snap your wrist, but they've expanded the space in between. And they're thin slicing that space in between in ways that the rest of the world and sometimes even their peers don't understand what's happening. So they're literally playing a different game. Now, you can't get to be able to play in the space between, whether that is for mastery of self or mastery of craft, without a really rich deep dive. You really have to have a deep dive, whether that's in craft or in self. And one of the things that I find troubling in the world of mindfulness and meditation is that somehow we're forgetting the value of craft. And there's this celebration that mindfulness has all of the answers. And if you just do mindfulness or you just meditate, that you'll have all the answers. that feels nauseating, first of all, right? That there's something that someone holds to be, to unlock the key for somebody else.
Yeah.
And the second is like there's a devalue somehow by not including the conversation of craft development. And so I'm always cautious about being included in conversations about mindfulness for those two reasons.
And it's odd because so many mindfulness conversations will hold as the idealized version of craft, whether it be pottery or any kind of art form that brings the present moment close at hand when you see it.
Whether that's
but yet it's not included in the
That's right,
process.
yeah. But if we go way back, it is. Pouring tea, calligraphy, you know, the arts, the martial arts, it was. It was the way. And there seems to be a loss of that now. And maybe this is just a reaction from not knowing what the individual conversations are across the globe. But it feels like there's a miss or a loss of value in craft development because somehow becoming best in the world at something is self-absorbed and self-serving.
Right.
You know,
which is odd because we're all trying to do it anyway in our work and lives and stuff.
Yeah.
So just before we have a few minutes to switch to the corporate sector and also open the floor for a few questions, but just give us an overview of some of the other exciting work you're doing in the field of high-performance athletics.
Okay.
Because we know there's more than the Seattle Seahawks, and I don't want to leave that out of the conversation as it often happens. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so I'm primarily interested in environments and conditions that are extremely rugged and have really high stakes, because I feel like that's where we do find ourselves, the razor's edge. And I've been fortunate enough to stand on the shoulders and have their, access to how they really think and understand for many years. And that is, I'd say that with great dignity for the people I've been able to work with, of which some have done really well and some have not. There's a project I'm working on right now that, as you can see, like my temperaments of this is, I'm really concerned about it. It's a man who's going to jump from 25,000 feet without a parachute. And he'll be the first to land he's basically jumping out in surf trunks. And he'll be the first to land doing so. And so that's
how will he land? I mean, everybody wants to know, how is he going to land?
Yeah.
How is that going to happen?
Yeah, we're still sorting that out.
Talk about risk.
Yeah. There'll be an announcement soon of like what the entire project looks like, but that's the project I'm working with. It'll happen this summer.
Wow.
And so that's the challenge with these projects is that it's binary. The outcomes are binary. And
So kindly put.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the involvement in them requires incredible risk just to be involved in it. And so I was fortunate enough to work with Felix Baumgartner from the Red Bull Stratus project, who in that program, some of you might be familiar with it, he was the first person to jump from 130,000 feet to break the speed of sound. And people before him had perished, and some were successful. No one had ever broken the speed of sound. And when you break the speed of sound, the brightest minds were not convinced that they knew what was going to happen. When you traveling Mach 1, would there be a double boom, meaning head and torso would do Mach 1, but what about the drag on the arms and feet? And would the body come through in one piece? And so, the amount of respect I have for people that push boundaries and live on the razor's edge, there's an incredible dark side to it. And I'm not sure that let's just say America is really ready to embrace the dark side of progression and pursuing personal best. And so we find a cocooned experience to judge others and to think that they're crazy or to think that what they do is wrong, and it somehow keeps us safe. Whether it's small judgment in conversations about our local neighborhood or our friendships, or it's this model that we work from that somehow to keep ourselves safe. And so as a quick little example, 100% of people, almost maybe 95% of people, you know who you are if you didn't raise your hand earlier that you want to get after it. I'd love if we could just do something really quickly is open this up to see if one person would like to come up and see how their mind works under pressure, and come up here and see how their mind works under pressure.
Get up here, someone quick.
Okay, so let's stop. There's 3 people that raised their hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm getting ready to. That's the hesitation that kills people on razor's edge. So the space between commitment and hesitation is a real thing. And until you get enough experience and reps on being on the razor's edge, do you really learn what you're about? And so there's 3 of you that raise their hand and say, yes, I'm interested in learning and growing and being uncomfortable, and I want to get a rep in front of people I don't know and I do know to understand what I have within me. And if you sat on your hands, it's likely that you're going to experience pain tonight, because what you've just experienced is the dissonance between who you want to be and who you just demonstrated to yourself that you are. And that uncomfortableness is hopefully disturbing. And it's maybe a gift that we can provide. However, you're likely doing something else right now, which is telling yourself a story about what just happened for you. And that story is what will perpetuate you feeling and being small. Because what you just did is that you didn't stand up and say, yeah, let me see what my mind's got. Let me see what I do. Let me see what I've got, how I work under pressure. And then so the story is something like, well, he didn't give me enough information. There was enough information. Or the story is something like, I always raise my hand. I want to give someone else a chance. Or the story is, why would I do that? Well, because it's a rep and an opportunity to demonstrate who you really are. And so you can tell yourself a story, no problems, but that will likely keep you small. And this introspection, if people are interested in mindfulness here, this process of discovery, real discovery, to reveal the truth of who a person is, it's as I'm speaking to the choir, it's not pretty. It's not hard to sit down and focus on breathing. That's mechanically easy to understand. But to link, and then the skill is like, can I link a couple breaths together? Can I follow some thoughts without attaching? Okay, that's a little bit harder to do, just based on how our mind works. And this room knows that. But really, to go and explore the dark side of who you are and the truth of who you are, that's the work. That's the hard work. And so I say this with love and at the same time, an appreciation for the razor's edge, that this work is it's not for everybody. I don't think it is. And I say that not in a disparaging way. I wish it was. But to do this work unsettles the certainty that people live with. And that sense of certainty feels really comfortable. And embracing the unknown, which you just had a chance to do, is really uncomfortable. And so there's there's just a rich appreciation for what is revealed within when you do the work. And I know that sounds trite, and I hesitated even before I said it, but that's, I think, a truthful statement.
No, I think it's great because, in fact, if we put aside the jargon that we usually use, the process you just described of all those thoughts and seeing them and being with them is actually what we mean when we talk about mindfulness. Less so just sitting and doing that breath. So having that statement without the architecture of the language, I think, is a great gift to connect to beyond what we're doing here and what we really want to do with our businesses. Yeah. So that's our next step. You just said this work is not for everyone, but you've just created a business with Coach Carroll that's taking this work that you're doing in high performance into the corporate space. So how are you doing this?
Yeah, that's
what,
a great
what
question.
are you doing in the corporate space that can help us immediately understand how this personal mastery can take place?
Yeah. Okay, so Coach Carroll's intellectual property is really about the methodology to switch on cultures. And he's really good at it. And he's got a really clear idea of how to switch on cultures. And it's not words on walls. That's not what a culture is, these aspirational ideas. It's built in the fabric of the relationships between people that are working together. And so he's got a methodology and an IP around that, and that's why he's had sustainable results in said environments. And then my interest in IP, intellectual property, is around training the mind for those that are wanting to pursue potential. So when we met and we came together, it felt like this really hand-glove experience where it was an accelerant that neither of us anticipated. And so it became like 4x in output. So he says, Mike, this is a couple weeks going into the first Super Bowl a couple months before the first Super Bowl that we went to. And he says, do you think anyone would be interested in what we're doing? And I just paused, and he paused, and he goes, oh, they got to be. Write it down. Write it down. So we just started writing like what we were doing together, and his ideas and my ideas, and we just kind of fused it together, and we built a curriculum. And then he called Satya, from the CEO of Microsoft, and said, hey, we think we're onto something. We're not sure. Would you be interested? And then, so we sat down with Satya, from CEO of Microsoft, and he said, wow, this is exactly what keeps me up at night, so to speak, as well. Like, I want to create a culture that has deep meaning and value. And so he said, can you do this for 100,000 people? We're trying to keep the wheels on for a couple hundred people. Like, how do you do it across 100,000? And so we said, who understands this work better than anyone else? It's people that have lived it and people have studied it. So we partnered with former Olympians that have done something on the world stage. They've medaled and or broken world records. And performance psychologists who understand the research and the science. And we shared with them our curriculum. And we have one with us today, Ariana Kukors, world champion, world record holder in swimming. Yep. And so she's one of... And if you have the chance to speak to Ariana, like, think about what it takes to be what she understands, to be the single best in the world at the thing that you care most about. Maybe the thing for you is parenting. Maybe it's being in an intimate relationship. Maybe it's building an enterprise. But think about what it takes to be the best in the world and what that process is. And so she's unlocked it. And so we shared our curriculum with them, and they said, great. And we rolled out in small rooms of 300 to 500 people at companies. And we're doing 8-hour full trainings. And they were saying, hey, this is great. This is not enough. We need more. And we do need more. Wow. So we're coming back for a second day. And I think we've hit like 10 to 12,000 folks at Microsoft to date, about 3 times those 8 hours. That's not enough, though. So it's so much information. The information that you guys hold is so rich and so important that we figured out that we need to be in their pocket, every day. And so we built 3 apps, and those apps are for scale. And those apps basically are 90 seconds to 3 minutes of daily trainings of how to keep your mind attuned and develop the habits of they're in line with mastery of self and mastery of craft. So there's 3 apps: In Mind, In Habit, and In Play. And In Mind is these 90-second quick hits and reminders. And so you get Coach Carroll in your pocket, you get the CEO of the company in your pocket, you get you get me in your pocket and the leaders. And then the second is In Habit, is creating that science around great habits. And then the third app, In Play, is how to put it in your life, put it in play in your life to bring other people into the fold of what you're trying to understand. So that's the way we're working on scale, is at least we're trying.
I think this is the time to start the few questions. We have about 6 minutes. And why don't you just pick out the ones you'd like to take. There's a microphone. Keep in mind how this question will benefit others in the room as well.
Okay, so I have to say this, okay? But you resemble an actor.
Oh, jeez.
I have to say this, and you know who it is, don't you?
Yeah, when he has a movie, I get told that often.
Okay, but you look better than him, so you're good.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're good. First of all, this has been an incredible experience for me. How I got here is bizarre, but it's good, related to sports. And you had mentioned something I just said to someone earlier today on the phone about it's about who you are. It's about discovering who you're being. And how long did it take for you to really have the epiphany and to take it to the highest level? Like, how long did it take for you to recognize that, wow, this is real, this is making me grow, this is making me understand more?
So I grew up in action sports, which action sports, non-traditional sports, non-stick and ball sports. And the essence of that is about that space between hesitation and commitment. And if you fail in that, you get hurt. And so it was just something that felt really natural to me at a young age. I didn't appreciate being told by another coach that I wasn't good enough. And so I moved away from traditional stick and ball sports. The reason kids leave sport is because of the car ride home and the coaches. And so I wanted to learn from the source, and I wanted to learn from Mother Nature and my relationship with it. And that was just something that happened really young. And so that's it's been this, I think, just an organic arc of trying to figure out that space between hesitation and commitment. And in action sport, or what you might call extreme sports, the industry of action and adventure sports shudder at the idea that it's extreme, even though the conditions are extreme, is that there's such a value for risk-taking that in skateboarding, for example, is that when a skateboarder goes for a trick and they try to do something and they fall and they're bleeding, that the other skateboarders around them will turn over their boards and tap their tail of the board on the concrete or the wood or wherever they are to demonstrate, we see you going for it. And so it's a community that values going for it, values failure and risk, because that is the process of progression. And so, you know, you hear the ideas, fail fast, fail forward, fail often, all of that stuff. Like, that's great, not to deny it, but you have to value something. And if you value failure, you're probably going to become one. And so we're not trying to become failures. We're not trying to become failures at what we're doing. We're trying to value something else, which is this internal drive to be hungry for progression. Yes. So whoever has it,
yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Please. And whoever has it, we've got 3 minutes. Who's ever got another question, go ahead and load up the mic and we'll be fast.
I'm dying to ask a question, and it's actually for both of you. Our culture is so, I mean, the way people tell the stories is all about hero's journey. And it's all about this myth that everybody kind of collectively subscribes to. So maybe from the side of the media and publishing industry, as from the performance coach, what do you have to tell about how maybe we can shift values, and not values, balance, about maybe propagating more culture of love and compassion and acceptance, no matter on performance, and not focusing so much on what's the outcome, but what's actually the quality of being?
I'll answer that by saying I'm deferring to Michael Gervais. If you listen to his answer, then that's what I say.
Can you say the question again? I'm joking. Yeah. Love. I don't know. Love and harmony are two words that I think are at the center of what we're trying to understand. And so, you know, love is a verb and all that good stuff. It requires action. And so I don't know if I have a succinct answer for you, but love and harmony are really important concepts. And we at the Seattle Seahawks talk about loving all the time. And there's a phrase, LOB, which was Legion of Boom, which is the defensive team. And they turned it in 2 years ago, they turned LOB from Legion of Boom to Love Our Brothers. And so it's a phrase, and it is something that's so important. We can't do this thing that we want to do alone. And the discovery of self through the actions that hold another person in the highest of regard, I think, is love. And we talk about it all the time. And so, but it requires action. So that's how, that's, yeah.
In the back there on the right.
In the back, yes.
Yeah, he's loaded.
Okay. Two are loaded. In the back all the way, please.
Michael, thanks very much for sharing with us today. I think it's incredibly insightful, and I'm sure everybody's getting a lot of value out of everything that you're sharing with us today. So, yeah, I just wanted to ask you, you're talking a lot about the fear of failure, and failure as a something that people fear stops them from doing and achieving whatever they want to achieve. But sort of my perspective on that is that is it really failure? I always just see it as a natural progression of growth to be able to get to where you're wanting to achieve, never looking at it and seeing it as a failure when you're in that progression to where you want to get to. Is that a different space, or?
Sounds just about right. Yep. And it's just getting reps and repetitions at it to become better, and maybe even possibly work towards mastering that process.
Because I think so many people focus so negatively on the whole aspect of failure that it paralyzes them from actually going forward and trying to repeat what haven't been successful at, instead of rather seeing it as a growth curve in regarding to getting where you want to achieve.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right on the money. Yes.
So I think our time, sadly, I think it just well, hold on a second. All right. Great. I've been spanked so many times by my colleagues for letting things go on too long. They want more. Yes.
Thank you. I have the question. You said to explore the dark, that it's important to explore the dark side of who you are. Can you say a little bit more about that?
It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Yeah, I think that I don't know what you would want to know about it other than it's real, and there's a dark side to the progression, to the process of becoming one's best. and maybe becoming one of the best in the world. And we don't talk about it. We see these beautiful Olympians that are doing amazing things, and these high-performing athletes in traditional stick and ball sports, and these celebrated CEOs. And there's a dark side to the process, and there can be a self-absorbed experience along the way, and a loss of self. And with fame and money and prominence, the cost of humility and presence can be real. And so identifying and understanding the traps and just normalizing that conversation, I think, is really important.
Thank you.
I think that is it. Ladies and gentlemen, please, Michael Gervais. Thank you. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.